when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary to reaffirm the bands which connect us one to another and to assert our spiritual identity as once again primary, clarity requires that we should articulate principles which, when taken together, shall light the way to remembering our unity. We hold these truths to be preeminent. This is the preamble to what I'm calling a declaration of interdependence. This summer we will examine the 5 principles of unity, the truths we hold as preeminent, and consider them both for ourselves and for our wider communities and even the planet. Today is the overview, and then over the summer I'll have a talk on each of the 5 principles. Now, in case you need a review, or you've never heard them, here is what I'm going to call the classic version of Unity's 5 principles. There's another version in your program. There's many versions, but here's the classic one. 1, there is one power and one presence active in the universe and in my life, God the good. 2, our essence is of God, therefore we are inherently good. This God essence was fully expressed in Jesus, the Christ. 3, we are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. 4, through prayer and meditation, we align our heart-mind with God. Denials and affirmations are tools we use. And 5, through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truth we know. And as we'll see, there are many versions of each principle, and I'll give my take as well, more deeply, as we go along. And again, I'll look at them both for ourselves and for the broader world around us. In other words, through a prism of interdependence, meaning mutual dependence. This notion of interdependence is certainly implied in our unity teachings, and yet sometimes we may emphasize our own prosperity and wellness and give shorter shrift to the prosperity and wellness of the wider world around us. More and more congregations like this one and Unity of New York are seeking a spirituality that engages the world, that wrestles with our part in dismantling racism, for example, or our part in healing the many divides of our planet: gender, race, nationality, creed, orientation, politics, and age, to name just a few. And in Unity, we do this work from a solid foundation of radical self-responsibility. It's one of the things I love about the Unity movement. We look at our own thoughts, our own part in the life that we're living, becoming co-creators with the force that we call God. What excites me is the notion of bringing that perspective to our broader healing work. So we're not narrowly focused on ourselves, me, nor are we trying to save the world out there, you, as if you need saving. But rather, we see it all as one. And we do this work ourselves, and then there is an overflowing into the world, an interconnection. It's not just I or you, it's we. We're coming up on July 4th, which in the United States we call Independence Day. It's the day we declared our independence from Britain. It's also an element each of us holds to some degree, the notion that I am independent of you. The self-made man is a phrase that you might have heard. And I have to ask, did you not emerge from a woman? Or don't you have teachers, heroes, and partners who helped shape you, without whom you would not be you? Now, the absurdity of a truly independent self is, of course, a foundational concept of Buddhism. They speak of interdependent origination. For example, a sprout comes from seed, earth, sunlight, air, water, and food, each of which also depends on other factors. David Bohm, B-O-H-M, a protege of Einstein's in the 50s and one of the world's most respected quantum physicists, looked at causality in modern physics and felt the perspective was sorely limited. In a great book called The Holographic Universe, which I'll get into more next time, Michael Talbot summarizes Bohm's take on causality like this, quote, "Bohm argued that the way science viewed causality was much too limited. Most effects were thought of as having only one or several causes. However, Bohm felt that an effect could have an infinite number of causes. For example, if you asked someone what caused Abraham Lincoln's death, they might answer it was the bullet in John Wilkes Booth's gun. But a complete list of all the causes that contributed to Lincoln's death would have to include all of the events that led to the development of the gun, all of the factors that caused Booth to want to kill Lincoln, all of the steps in the evolution of the human race that allowed the development of a hand capable of holding a gun, and so on and so on." Bohm conceded that most of the time one could ignore the vast cascade of causes that have given rise to any effect. But he still felt it was important for scientists to remember that no single cause and effect relationship was ever really separate from the universe as a whole. End quote. So let me repeat that last sentence. He felt it was important for scientists to remember that no single cause and effect relationship was ever really separate from the universe as a whole. In other words, interdependence. As children, we are dependent on adults. Then we gain our independence and move into the world, and for many of us, that's where it stops. Now, some of us move into what we call codependence, a phrase coined to speak of the partners of addicts who themselves are also dependent on something. But while the addict has a substance or activity they're dependent on, the codependent is dependent on the addict and on people in general. So codependency is a need to control and get approval from other people. The addiction is to others at the expense of oneself. Healing from codependence requires a discovery of self apart from the addict, apart from others, apart from the needs and wishes of other people. Who am I? What do I like to do? What are my dreams? Unity has helped many of us discover exactly that, to celebrate ourselves as children of God with unique and wonderful qualities, to move from avoidance of living our own lives to a full embrace of life and our own magnificent journey. A spiritual awakening can then move us into interdependence, the we perspective. Our second principle says, because God is good, and we are children of God, that each of us is also inherently good. And of course, all of us are inherently good, which is important to emphasize. As the Quakers say, there is that of God in each of us. And our journey to knowing this, our journey to self-love, is intertwined with the journey of forgiveness and shadow work, of learning to love our enemies, of reaching beyond ourselves with organic generosity. Because we really do affect each other much more than we realize. In 1988, I was still new to the city, just out of college, and very much shut down to who I was specifically. I was deep in what we call the closet. So deep I hadn't acknowledged I was gay even to myself, and all of that pushing down and denying diminished my vitality in ways I felt but could not articulate. One night that year, I went with my roommates to a party in the village. I remember it as a large apartment with perhaps 50 people milling about, talking, eating, drinking, maybe some music playing. But the one thing that stood out, the one thing that in fact changed my life, was a couple sitting on a couch. It was two men around my age, both very comfortable, happy and completely at ease, being gently affectionate, one with his head on the other's shoulder. And importantly, everyone else at the party was totally fine with this. I got a glimpse of their lived reality, a reality I had never really experienced before. It was as if a possibility opened up in my mind. The simplicity of it, the energy they demonstrated changed me. I don't know their names. Of course, they had no idea that they had that effect on me. They were simply living their lives honestly. You and I have had that effect on others. Like it or not, we are interdependent. Therefore, doing work on ourselves and learning how to bloom really can impact lives. So can simple acts of kindness that overflow from that open heart. A few years ago on a Sunday, I arrived at church early to practice with the choir in New York. The soloist was named Ben, an amazing singer who could go from bass to soprano and just sing you into a state of wowness. So I arrived in a great mood. After all, I love my choir family and love to sing and be at unity, and I gave Ben a hug and went about preparing for the service. Well, the next week, he pulled me aside to tell me what that hug had meant to him. You know, when you gave me that hug, he said, as if referring to some profound grace that I'd bestowed. I don't remember what exactly he said, except apparently my spur-of-the-moment hug had affected him deeply. And it's not like I have magic hugs. You've given hugs like this too. I've experienced them to each other. But I was in a place to follow my impulse, a church where people do that, where love is expressed with enthusiasm, and it turns out he needed that on that particular day. I remind myself of this because I want to err on the side of affection, to risk embarrassment and push past my comfort zone when it comes to love. And of course, to give myself a similar love and be open to receiving it. There is, of course, a faction within Christianity that sees us all as unworthy sinners, evil by nature, and needing salvation from our original sin. This is fire and brimstone Christianity, where you start as a lowly worm, likely to burn for all eternity, and if you work hard and avoid all temptations, you might earn your way into a reasonably comfortable afterlife. Yay. Movements like Unity came along in opposition to all that, to bring back Jesus' radical teaching of our goodness, of love that moves in all directions and transforms hearts while here on earth. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right in front of us if we live it into being. So we celebrate the wonder of life and the goodness inherent in us, uncovering and reclaiming our magnificence. That's our second principle, and our fifth, living the truth of our own goodness. I think we want to be careful that we don't go to the other extreme, from I'm a lowly worm to I am the one and only supreme sovereign, bow to me. Norman Vincent Peale wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, a seminal and important work. However, some have misinterpreted that to mean if you say something, you can make it so. So what I say is the new truth, and I'm just going to say it until you surrender. Because I'm great, and by implication, you not so much. So I also want to remember humility. It's a word that might confuse some people, perhaps because it sounds like humiliation. But true humility is knowing I am human and prone to errors as I make my way through life, and I'm just as great and just as challenged as everyone else, ultimately. I think the new pope and the previous one seem to have that, at least somewhat. The Dalai Lama has it. Humility is crucial to interdependence. And Jesus, of course, teaches what I'll call radical humility. His life is one of humble greatness, born in a manger, living among outcasts, not hanging out with celebrities. In Luke 14:11, he says, "Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." He emphasizes a simple life, low on possessions, never preoccupied with status or wealth. He wants us to do the work. As we say in Principle 5, you have to live these truths. So in Matthew 5:23, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. So forgiveness, reconciliation, saying I'm sorry is more important than any church activity. He wanted us to do that work. And Jesus tells us the meek shall inherit the earth. And yet a few verses later, that we are the light of the world. When we de-emphasize the ego, we are meek or humble, and we allow our spiritual greatness to shine through. Humility and greatness in one. I think it's a beautiful, all too rare balance. In unity, we see Jesus as our way shower, someone who really lived this stuff as a transformative practice. And when it's been tried, it has in fact transformed the world. I think it's important to say that we have an example, a person we believe lived up to this, who we therefore look up to as a teacher, who embodied the Christ and became known as Jesus the Christ, not because he was the only one, as we heard, not because Christ is a person, but because he embodied that Christ, merged the human with the divine. Many unity congregations like this one acknowledge Jesus in this manner, in their version of the second principle. And we'll have more on that in 2 talks. Now, Jesus did speak of sin, but in unity, sin is error. When we make errors, error thinking, we want to admit it so we can grow into the full realization of our highest and best selves. Humility is being willing to say both, I am awesome, and I really made a mistake here. With humility, we can see when we're falling short and work the principles. We can pray or take a class that challenges the way that we think. And if we take this beyond the personal framework, we can admit that together, we may have hurt others unconsciously because we live in a world that has trained us to think certain ways. The third principle says we create our experience of life through our way of thinking. Normally, when we say that, we mean that you create your life experience and I create mine. Each of us has an experience we're creating of life based on thoughts we're holding. But through an interdependent lens, this principle says we collectively create our life experiences through our collective thinking. Structural racism and sexism, for example. When I was born, interracial marriage was still illegal in some states, and a woman needed her husband's permission to get a credit card. That is deep. And if you said to that woman, just think more positive thoughts, that would not be the nice thing to say, right? Or the right thing. This was a collective issue. And if we've collectively done that, if we've incorporated deep error thinking into our collective unconscious, then we may have some work to do together to unravel that, to unravel those commonly held thoughts that we don't even realize we're holding, or we don't realize the pain these thoughts create in our fellow children of God. And then in relation to the fourth principle, what are we praying collectively? And in relation to the fifth, how do we live these principles not only for ourselves, but for the greater world? How does that interplay work? And can it, please, be play? Because we're looking to expand the party, if you will. That's the movement I've seen in my lifetime. The changes I've witnessed are astonishing because people challenged us to live into God's dream, the dream of unity, which can become a reality of unity when we work and play to make it so. Let's not shame people into obedience, but rather invite them to celebrate our unity, to join the party. So this summer, let's celebrate each of us and all of us as we look into the principles. We'll look next at the first principle, 2 weeks from today. What does having one power and only one power mean for us and the world? Take a look at the principles over the next few months. Google them for different versions to see what resonates most with you and your developing understanding. We'll fill in that Declaration of Interdependence month by month so we can really live these principles for the benefit of all. I am looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Thank you.